And we are live. Data Storytellers. Today on the show, I have with me Stephen Keys. Stephen is the head of Insight over at Appreciate Group, and he has a very interesting background, quite a strong professional background as well. And I will pick his brain on all things data today. Stephen, welcome on the show.
Hi, thank you.
Fantastic. So first question, because most of our audience won't know you, would you mind giving a short introduction into what led you into the world of data and how you ended up being the head of Insight over at Appreciate Group?
Yeah, okay. So I think I've always had an interest in numbers, I suppose, and I think through the course of my studies at university, which I did business and marketing, I'd kind of got interested in terms of, the marketing side of that and kind of what drives people's decisions, choices, etc., and how marketing can help kind of drive benefit from that. But then kind of linking that to data is my early days in the kind of data analytics space was as an analyst in a marketing function, analyzing customer behavior, customer trends, and direct marketing, and how that works way back in the mid 90s at this point. So that's kind of how I suppose transitioned into that kind of, from understanding and really loving working with numbers to then really getting excited about how organizations communicate and attract new customers and how they build commercial value from it. And then I kind of spent about 10 years as a practitioner and working my way up through that, working across a number of sectors. So I started in retail. At the time, mail order retail was pretty strong in terms of its use of data. We had big data sets, or what we thought were big data sets at the time, which were probably a data warehouse the size of a terabyte. And terabytes nowadays you can pretty much get on a USB stick. So it was what we thought was probably big data at the time, and so built up a lot of skills and capability in terms of using SQL and SAS and various different tools to get to the point of how we use that data for segmentation, for targeting, for analysis, for measurement. And then I moved into retail banking, and retail banking, I guess at the time, was another sector which was evolving and increasing its use of customer data. So understanding what transactions people are making, understanding how you can retain and how you can acquire new customers, increase value, etc. And I spent 5 years then working in retail banking across lending products, across kind of current account and money transmission products, and you kind of building myself up to a level. And then I worked in telecommunications for a short while as well. Again, another booming sector in terms of understanding data usage. The whole business case for I went in to kind of create a data analytics function at a company that eventually got bought out and taken over by Vodafone, on the sole use case of predicting churn and using our data to try and understand why customers or predict when customers are likely to move their contracts to other providers. And then can we do proactive calling, and can we build a business case where we can actually try and retain our customers? So spent some time there, and then I kind of went back to retail banking, and interesting, I suppose, within a B2B context then. So I spent some time at a really large retail bank, but predominantly in business to business. So taking some of the concepts that I developed and delivered within consumer and trying to tailor that and change that to how we would do similar things really. Acquire more customers, cross-sell to customers, retain customers, drive value, but also this time, I suppose, supporting a sales function, in terms of providing that data in such a way, rather than doing through, large-scale direct marketing campaigns, but actually providing data to sales teams who can then action that, pick the phone up, and it's a different way of kind of being able to, I suppose, kind of deploy insight and deploy analytics into a sales function as opposed to into kind of a kind of large-scale kind of CRM platform. And so I spent kind of about 10 years or so, like really heavily as a practitioner, and doing more things, doing slightly more sophisticated techniques. These days we'd probably call it data science. We didn't call it data science in those days. It's kind of statistical modeling and etc. And then I kind of took a bit of a transition then into consultancy. So I worked for about 7 or 8 years for two of the largest management consultancies in the UK. I'm focused predominantly around customer transformation, customer experience, customer insight, and then the latter half of that specifically around data projects. How do you then evolve a data capability, picking on specific projects. Did some really fantastic projects actually in terms of, in the online gaming sector, which I've never worked in before. Some fantastic amounts of data available there, and some really, really great use cases in terms of using that. So I'd spent quite a bit of time in consulting, quite a lot of experiences, a lot in different markets, doing things, for example, things like pricing strategy and building kind of wargaming type things where you can, if business A increases their prices by 5%, what happens to their competitors, and lots of different things. So some really fantastic projects, and then I decided to kind of leave the consulting market and then go into kind of more leadership roles. So I led in retail predominantly. So I've spent the last 4 or 5 years, particularly in the retail sector, looking at loyalty programs, data science initiatives, and then my current role is looking across a broad range of what you might call insight, from BI to analytics, data science to development of our CRM platform, and also in terms of the research and the kind of market research, competitor research, customer research aspects as well. So I think, lots of different experiences, lots of different sectors, but all fundamentally about how do we understand more about what's happening either with our customers or within our operational environments, and using our data to do that, to then drive either increase value, improve efficiency, and ways in which that fundamentally the business is doing things better and making more value from its data. So and that's that's my passion, I suppose, really, is being able to see things that maybe other people think might be there or might not be there, but actually be able to see the data itself, and kind of tell the story about what that data really is telling us, and how do we change what we're doing because of what the data is telling us is out there, and you make that assumption, right, don't you? So that what you see in the data is largely driven by what the customer's mindset might be, etc. So that's kind of potted 25-year history in this field across like I said, numerous different places and use cases.
It sounds like you have a wide breadth of experience, and also you worked at different levels of seniority as well. And it's a very, very long time in the 21st century, this 20-25 years, especially when we talk about data and data analytics. So from your perspective, and I understand that it might be difficult to maybe nail down just one single thing, but what were some of your main challenges during your professional journey when you tried to engage an organization and make sure that being data driven was not just a buzzword, but really became a way of life? So what were some of your biggest challenges on the road?
I think, it's probably the subject of this podcast, right? So I think the challenge sometimes is you have a lot of data there and you have a lot of great ideas, but how do you get someone to see what you see, and then want to back you in terms of wanting to be able to do that? And I think the real moment for me, I think, was when I moved into a consultancy, into consultancy roles, and actually the kind of personal development that you would go through in that particular role versus, I suppose, making my way up through as an analyst to a manager of analysts to etc. Is quite different. And one of the first things that kind of graduate consultants get taught is how to structure a story. And you come up with these different acronyms or processes around situation, complication, resolution, and all these things is about how do you take the thing that you know and the thing that you found and the thing that you want to say and structure it in such a way that enables the recipient to understand it, and therefore to be probably as passionate as you about actually doing something about it. And that 7 or 8 years I spent in management consultancy, I think, really sharp on that skill, I suppose, because if I couldn't do that, I couldn't sell a £250,000 project to a client. So and that was my role. So you kind of have to sharpen a lot of them skills, and actually you become I became a bit more commercial in the way that I could think about actually what the opportunities were, a bit more structured in terms of how you might then put a program together based upon the things that you see and the outcomes you want to get to, and also able to talk to people who probably, the first time I mentioned the regression analysis or anything like that, they switch completely off. So how do you kind of still get them excited about the things that it's telling you and believe the things that you're telling you to then want to go and make something different? I think that's the key piece for me, is recognizing that it's a very different skill set, and actually how you develop those skills and how you pick up some of them hidden tips in terms of how to do that wasn't necessarily something that I got as much in that first kind of period of my career, but certainly in that period there, a lot of time. And actually now I probably spend more of my time doing that and working with my team to say, well, okay, how do we go and tell the story about what that piece of analysis is telling us? Which are the key highlights that we want to focus on, that we want somebody to go and do something about, or to help us do something about? And I probably spend I don't know, 75% of my week, doing that or presenting that, or do you know what I mean? So I think that's the kind of the real transformative moment, I suppose, and why I was really excited about kind of doing this podcast, because I think it's really key. And actually what I kind of take away from a lot of that is, with my teams, is aiding their development in that same way. And the recognition is that, is that the easy thing is to go and develop your technical skills as an analyst. And I say easy, and it's not easy, but it's the first thing that comes to mind, is when you write a PDP, a personal development plan, and you go, what are the things you want to go and learn? It's right, I want to do a course for this and a course for that and a course for this, that, and the other. And generally they're technical. But actually some of these other things are really, really important, because it can be very frustrating when you've got something on your head and you just can't get it out. And so really, really important.
Those are such great insights, and there's a bunch of stuff that I would like to go into detail here. So let's maybe start from the big picture here, because what we understood over the years, that it's almost like a conceptual challenge for people who work in these hard skill oriented professions, numbers, statistics, technology. How would you actually articulate from your perspective as a data professional? What kind of skills are we talking about? How would you like to label it that actually relates to data professionals? Is it people skills, human skills, soft skills, public speaking skills?
Yeah. So I structure everything across three lenses. When I talk about people, I mean, when I do my own development plan, which obviously, I'm still doing, but with others is I pick on three things. One is technical, and it is about programming code languages, using BI tools, statistical modeling, excuse me, easy for me to say, statistical tests, things like that. And that's definitely the technical. And then the other bit is then it is a kind of around commercial skills, right? So understanding how does a business make money, or what are the objectives, and understanding that commerciality of what it is we're trying to do. I think it's really important to understand the P&L in terms of the organization we're in, because those are the numbers that we're effectively trying to change. So I think that's really, really quite important. And then the last one is the softer skills, and it is about being able to tell stories. It's about being able to build relationships, build trust. And those things are, in my experience, those last two things, in fact, that commerciality bit and the kind of softer personal skills are two areas that I suppose quite often get overlooked, or maybe don't get overlooked, but we don't pay as much credit, as much importance to, because I'm an analyst. I want to do analysis. I might not like talking to people about what I'm doing, but I have to. And if I want to get on, I have to. You know what I mean? So so in previous roles and in my current role, that's what I kind of talk to the teams about, and try to get them to view their skills under those three different lenses, and then think about, what is it within each of those three things that I want to do and I want to be, and look to develop that. And again, it's not about training courses. I learned quite a lot as well. I don't know, these percentages quite often change, but this kind of 80, 20, 10, or whatever it is, in terms of experience versus picking up from your peers versus structured training. And actually, I really do believe it. I'm one myself in the fact that I can do as many training courses, but until you actually start doing it and talking to people about it, it quite often doesn't stick as much.
Exactly. Well, this whole 4 stages of learning, right? When you start with unconscious incompetence, when you don't even know what you don't know, then you are being exposed to the right information and you become consciously incompetent. You still can't do it, but at least you understand. And then as you start to put it into practice, you become consciously competent, but it's still clunky, still takes a lot of manual control. It's not a competence per se. And then the final stage, which only comes with practice and experience of success and both failure, you can develop unconscious competence when it's just second nature. So we found exactly the same. And also what you mentioned about these focus areas with the technical skills, commercial skills, and the soft skills. Because since we've been doing this since 2017, we had a company that we sold in 2020 called Data Leaders. And it was just about bringing together top data professionals from large companies to discuss common challenges and establish best practice on how to lead the data function. And it actually surprised us that the conversation naturally, when we gave you guys free rein on what to talk about, always went to that area. So technical skills, it's almost a non-starter. It's what you guys are naturally good at. And also in that space, there's just so many solutions out there already. That's not the biggest challenge. The challenge is exactly as you said. It's more about commercial savvy and business understanding. And then most importantly, the soft skills. So if we want to do the 80-20, I think this is actually what we naturally started to focus on. 20% about business understanding and really adopting that mindset of thinking with the business's brain, right? What are the priorities in the business, how a business functions, and then 80% of soft skills of how to communicate, how to build relationships, and how to tell these powerful stories. So that's fantastic. Of course, with our scope here at the Data Storytellers, and probably the name betrays this, our focus is not at all on the technical skills. We're not really good at that. And you guys know this way better than we do, right? So what we do is really provide a platform where we can unpack what makes a data professional successful when we focus on business and communication. So maybe let's spend a little bit of time on each of these. So when we talk about commercial skills and the business skills, what do you think are the keys for a data professional to understand the business and develop commercial savvy? What do you think are the key priorities here?
Yeah, a couple of things really. So firstly is I always like to, wherever I've worked, I kind of like to try, I want to be a customer, and go through the process. So the organization, the company where I'm at the moment, we have a number of different websites and businesses. And actually one of the first things I did was actually go and purchase from us and just to go through that process, because you start to then get a sense of the thought processes that customers are going through, the experiences they're getting, which ultimately result in the data you see. And then because I can go and code, right, I go see my own data. So, but you get the understanding of kind of the process that I've gone through and the journey I've gone through to where I am, and then obviously all the communications and things that I get as a customer, which I obviously have input into what they are and who gets what and all that kind of thing. So I think the first thing is really just be a customer, is walk their shoes, see what they do, think what they think. And then that just means that when I look at the data, is I've got context and I understand, why that data might be saying what it's saying, because I've been through that process. And I think also, alongside that, I think is also, where there is research, where there is kind of external data about that, I think that context is really, really important. Because the last thing you really want to do is, if you could be doing the most sophisticated machine learning model, but if it's not actually indicating reality, then it's not actually going to deliver you any value. So I think that's really important. The other one is then, as I kind of mentioned before, it's about what does the P&L, how is the P&L structured, right? So how do I see revenue? What margin do I make on that? What profit do I make? What are the costs involved? And just understanding that, because if I'm going to propose, some particular initiatives based upon the insight, I need to get the business to understand what the opportunity is, and therefore how does it affect the bottom line within the organization. So I think that's also really important to understand. And now, it doesn't mean become an accountant, right? And it just means have an appreciation of what that is and how you make value through that. So an eye opener for me is the organization I work in, we sell gift cards, and therefore most of our profit is driven by utilization of gift cards. Actually, as a chunk of our profit is driven by non-utilization of gift cards, but it's understanding some of these dynamics. And it actually says, well, then how do we show the value, that things that we want to do, how do we show that value, and how do we show that it actually makes an impact? So I think really it's so important to have context, and so important to understand and to understand your data in the context of how it arrives there, and then so important to understand actually, if you want to do something different, how do you make value? And that's the kind of P&L side of it. So those two things I think are critically important. And I've never really been one to think of an analyst or a data scientist as somebody that sits in a dark room and does some code. I think it is really important to see what's going on around and articulate the insight and the findings that you get in that way, and get people to understand what that is by talking their language almost.
Absolutely. And data never exists in isolation, or at least it should not, right? Because its very purpose is connected to the business. And that's what it actually shares with the people in the business. So both the data and the people are part of the same business. Now, once we have that context, let's move on to people. So when we talk about data, first of all, why is it so important to understand people as a data professional? Can you just give a short executive summary of that from your perspective, and then we can move on to some of the specifics about relationship building, trust, and stories. But if you had to summarize, why are human skills, people skills, are so essential for a data professional today?
Well, if I was a sole trader and I worked solely on my own, then perhaps it's less important. But the problem is I'm not, and we're not, and therefore I can't change the world on my own, and therefore other people need to help me, or I need to help them. And so therefore it's very important that communication is good, right? And those relationships are strong, and that trust is strong, and therefore and almost the need for each other is strong as well, right? So and as long as we're kind of myself, my team, and outside of the team are kind of moving in the same direction, then really we should be collaborating. We should be making sure that and it's about other people's context as well, right? So I go back to the example where I was saying before, I kind of moved into a business to business environment, and I kind of get the insight, and I get the data, and I get, because I've done banking before, and I've used the tools before and all that. But if I'm not able to go and talk to the recipients of that data or that insight and really understand how they want to see it, what's going to really help them, if I can't do that, then we're not going to realize the benefit and the value of the things that we're doing. So the reality is we're a whole team, and therefore we've got to communicate, and we've got to believe each other, trust each other, and work together to kind of get to that point. Because as much as I'd like to, we can't do everything by ourselves.
Absolutely. And even if you're a sole trader, right, you do have customers that you need to communicate with.
Of course you do. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting. It's that point about listening, isn't it? Whether you're listening to your customers or listening to your stakeholders or whoever it be, is that's so important as a skill, and as to focus on. Actually, how do you listen? How do you act upon that? You know what I mean? And ask more questions, and
Exactly. And this is the same basically when you want to sell an idea, and you always have to, like, whatever profession you work in, you almost always have to, but definitely when you work in data, because it's something that people still are not familiar with. It's kind of like a strange alien world. And even if people kind of buy into the hype around data, which definitely helps, right, that doesn't allow them to see what you see. I think you mentioned that before, and it's as accurate as it gets when we talk about storytelling. It goes down into
that's where the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole thing's kind of come together, because there's lots of instances where people have a gut feeling or a hunch about something, and actually, or a hypothesis, right, in consulting terms. But it's like and actually, what our role is partly is to back that up. So I'm not overly surprised if everything that we do or we deliver as insight is new news. I think largely, one is it backs it up, and two is I can quantify it, right? So you might know that a particular product is right for a particular type of person, but one of the purposes of my analysis is, one, to back that up or dispel it, but two is actually to quantify how important that is, through lots of different techniques and correlations or whatever it might be. So I'm not overly surprised if I'm not telling you new news, but what I am doing is I'm giving you greater confidence that that's right or wrong, and I'm also telling you how strong that and how right that is, if you like, and therefore potentially how we can make value from that or not. So I think the interesting one sometimes is when you find something that is contrary to what long-term thought has been, right? And that's happened a number of times. And this is where those softer skills are so important, and also the technical skills. The technical skills are really important about how do you visualize the behavior, the finding, if you like, and then how do you deliver it, and in a sensitive way that you're not just telling someone that they're stupid, because I don't ever believe that, but just saying, look, here's some evidence, and this is what we see, and make it the data tell the story then, as opposed to actually using your own kind of I don't know, thoughts or kind of experience.
Your own intuition, absolutely. And then, and I would love to explore some best practices here. Now, before we go a little bit further into that of how to build trust and how to make sure that you have these strong relationships to support you, and maybe even how to deliver impactful stories. First, in your career, how should we imagine this? So as a data professional who operated at different levels of the business, what were some of the key types of conversations that you've had to exercise these soft skills? So how should we imagine this? Are we talking about you speaking to business users, you're speaking to the board, senior executives? Like, what are some of these archetypal conversations that you can identify? Maybe getting buy-in from senior management, maybe getting someone to adopt a data-driven way of working on the ground. What do you think are some of the most important touch points for a data professional in that sense?
I think the interesting thing is about thinking about your audience, right? So, and who we're trying to have that conversation with. So, in a board meeting, there's a bit more structure to what you're trying to say, and a bit more around the commerciality, and probably a little bit more maybe overconfidence, I suppose, in terms of the way in which you deliver that. In a consultative way, there's situations, I suppose, where I've kind of been working in a post-sale situation with a client, and I'm sat down working with the team, and it is much more about actually we all, how do we work together to kind of get to this point? Obviously, knowing the direction and knowing the things that we're trying to achieve, but it's a different set of skills, I suppose, isn't it? You kind of got to build trust in a different way, that you're just not going to drop the minute when you walk away, right? And so it's just about recognizing the people you're talking to, right? And I guess it's I guess that seems obvious, right? That's marketing 101, right? Know your customer. But I think that's really key. And about therefore you're kind of going to structure your conversation in a different way, and the outcome of what it is you're trying to do, right? I might just be trying to get, if I'm selling a project, I want that agreement, and I want them to close that deal so that we can sign and start moving to a delivery mode. It's just about understanding who it is you're talking to and what it is we're trying to achieve at the end of that, personally, but also collectively, so that it's kind of a valuable conversation.
Mm-hmm. And what are your best practices to do this? Because I know that there are different methods here. You can do independent research. You can kind of look into the different aspects of the business without even talking to people. And there are obviously the more interactive ways of sitting down with individuals, asking the right questions. So what was your best practice historically in terms of connecting to your audience and understanding their real desires, frustrations, and priorities?
So I think typically, if I'm meeting someone for the first time, I think what I would be looking for or asking is of people that may know the person that I'm meeting for the first time, and just some insights on that way. So in the consulting world, we used to basically build kind of stakeholder maps to understand, in terms of the final decision maker, who are the other people around that you kind of need to get, you might want to have a conversation with to try and understand what those frustrations might be before you get to that point. So, and it would be quite, so it's about kind of understanding their networks and about those decision makers and influencers, I suppose. There is things like, looking on things like LinkedIn and stuff like that, and it'll only tell you so far. I don't think people necessarily post frustrations and things like that on LinkedIn, do. It's generally good news stories, but so it's just trying to understand that broader network, I think. And I mean, more often than not, when we're kind of meeting a client in my previous roles, when you're meeting a client for the first time, then generally it's through an introduction or through and that's kind of ways just to understand actually how do we need to kind of talk about this, what kind of structure do we need around this. But I think the other thing is it's just the planning bit, right? It's so important to put that hard yards in terms of the planning before you get to that point, knowing that if the conversation does meander elsewhere, that you have thought about it beforehand as well.
That makes sense. And then as you start to acquire their perspectives and you start to get in touch with their priorities, how does that eventually lead to a fruitful relationship? Because that's what we're looking at, right? So trust always comes up. So what are the keys to develop trust with your audience over time as a data professional?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first things really is to do what you say, and I just think it's so important. First impressions count, and all that. So it's so important that when you say you're going to do it, you do it. So you could at least be trusted in that sense. And then it's just about kind of getting to know the person that you're trying to build that relationship with, and a bit, as you said, a bit more about who they are, what their challenges are, so that you can understand that. But I do think, I think probably where I can kind of think probably of moments where, I've not built that trust with people, and think probably that has been in situations where maybe I've said I was going to do something and not done it that way, and probably overpromise, underdelivered. And those are the things that probably drive you, I suppose, in terms of the things that don't go well, because you never want that to happen again. So I think it's just
it's one of the virtues. It's one of the virtues of the data transformation leader, that you're reliable and that you follow up on your promises. If you think about that element of leadership, because ultimately that's what you're doing, even when you are not necessarily at the helm of, I don't know, like a huge team, you're not responsible for 50 people, you are engaging in leadership, even if you just try to present a perspective to someone that you want them to buy into, right? You are exercising leadership of vision in that sense. So when you talk about leadership, one would be reliability, but what do you think are the other virtues of the ideal data transformation leader? Can you think of anything else? Because during these conversations, many of these come up, and it's a very important piece of storytelling, where the story actually comes from. It's important to understand who you're telling the story to. It's very, very important to iron out the actual story, but then it comes from somewhere, and that's you, and the position from where you articulate that story is super important. So what do you think are the cardinal virtues of the data transformation leader?
Yeah, a great question. I think sometimes it's about recognizing where the journey needs to get to, and what that outcome needs to be. I think it's so important sometimes just to keep that always in mind, because I have been guilty in the past, and I call other people out sometimes as well in my teams, that where we meander down different rabbit holes and end up spending a huge amount of time delivering zero to where we want to get to as a vision. So I think it's really important to have that, and also I think be the person that challenges whether activities are are taking us in that direction, right? And not be scared to call some of them things out, right? So I think it's not single-mindedness, but it's just having that clear understanding of what it is we're trying to achieve, and then it comes about actually making sure that other people understand that vision and that end point and that goal, and are bought into that same outcome, right? I think what I'm not, though, is generally I'm not the person that knows every answer, right? So, and that's probably about the consulting part of it, and speaking to other people and the collaboration about actually trying to understand or know the right people to speak to get to the right answers, to get to the right decisions, and make sure that you can get to that point. So I think what I found is as my career has evolved, it might be that overall I have less answers, right, in terms of specific solutions. I just know what it is we need to get to, and I will use the people around me and the team that I've got on, and to kind of help us get to that point. But what I do have is I'm thinking further ahead in terms of where that needs to get to, and I will use people with different skills around me. As someone once told me once, actually, sometimes is that the best leaders don't know all the answers, and actually what they do know is they know someone who does know the answers. And it's just about sometimes having that network as well, to make sure that you've got people you can consult and people that can help. Because I don't think anybody knows absolutely everything, or if they say they do, perhaps
it's a red flag. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So this was very insightful, because we spent some time talking about the audience and the importance of relationships and trust. So this is really the recipients of any given story. And then we explored best practice on what kind of posture to take, and you're trying to influence someone with the story. So that's fantastic. The only thing that's left, and maybe we can finish on this, is the actual story. So can you think of any best practices over your career that you identified when it comes to telling a powerful story with or about data to influence a key stakeholder? Maybe some of the best practices and some of the pitfalls that you can think of would be very helpful if you could share.
I think I could probably think about examples where it's not gone too well, right? And that would probably be where the story is very complicated. And so what I would kind of take from that is simplicity is quite important. And whilst the world is not that simple, I get that. But in order to be able to get a message across and get someone to understand what it is you want to achieve, simplicity is important. And also, again, the same person that said to me about important is not knowing all the answers, but knowing people who do know the answers, also said to me on an interview once is start with the answer, and then tell me how you got to the answer, instead of stringing me on a very long story. And great, you're taking me on a great journey, but by the time you get to the answer, I've probably switched off a little bit. So I think the other thing is, keep it simple. Start with the answer, and then tell me how you got to the answer, and then tell me the answer again. But just, I think, there's a tendency, I think, because we do very complex jobs and we have very specific skills, and there's a whole lot of data around to actually show lots of things. And I think really the best stories are a bit simpler, a bit shorter, and get to the point.
Yeah, they find a way home, definitely. When you are all over the place, sometimes you can just lose track. So simplicity, focus on the answer. Those are great points of advice. So fortunately, our time is up, but maybe if you could share your personal recommendations to aspiring data leaders, someone who spent 25 years in the industry, you've really seen these changes, you've seen success and failure. What would you recommend data professionals to focus on if they want to become successful in this environment?
So I think one thing really, it's just be inquisitive and don't be scared to ask the questions. So I just think the more context and the more you understand about the business you're in, the better your analysis and the better your insights will be. And so ask questions, be inquisitive. Same goes with new tools, new data, new software. It's just be inquisitive. Look for these things. Have a go. But yeah, always be inquisitive and ask questions. Try to understand it. Yeah, I think I just think it's probably one of the most. I say that a lot to my team. I think is just don't take things for granted. Ask questions.
That's great advice, Stephen. Thank you very much for your insights. We appreciate you, sir, and we wish you the best and hope to have you on the show, maybe speaking to our community at some point in the future as well.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.